Millionaire comes home early. And can't believe what he sees. The black Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway 3 hours earlier than usual. Behind the steering wheel, Marcus Sterling gripped the leather with white knuckles, his jaw clenched tight from the day's frustrations. The board meeting had ended in disaster. His biggest investor had pulled out without warning. Now, at 42 years old, the man who owned 17 luxury hotels across the country was facing his first real crisis. He needed silence. He needed space. He needed to think. But what Marcus Sterling found when he quietly opened the front door of his $20 million estate would change everything he thought he knew about his perfect life. The mansion stood like a fortress of glass and marble overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Marcus had bought it 5 years ago, right after his company went public. It had everything a successful man could want. An infinity pool that seemed to flow into the ocean. A wine cellar worth more than most people's homes. 7 bedrooms that rarely saw guests. A kitchen that could serve 100 people, though it usually prepared meals for just 3. Marcus lived here with his wife Victoria and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. At least, that's what he told himself. The truth was, Marcus lived at the office. He saw his family during rushed breakfasts and occasionally on Sunday afternoons when there were no conference calls. Victoria managed the household with the precision of a CEO, organizing charity galas and maintaining their social status. Emma spent her days with tutors, tennis coaches, and the household staff. It was a life that looked perfect from the outside. Magazine perfect. Instagram perfect. But perfect can be lonely, and Marcus had been too busy to notice the cracks forming in his carefully constructed world. As he stepped through the mahogany doors that Tuesday afternoon, Marcus expected to find the usual scene. The housekeeper Maria polishing the crystal chandelier. The gardener trimming the already perfect hedges. Perhaps the faint sound of Emma's piano lesson drifting from the music room. Instead, he heard laughter. Not the polite, measured laughter of afternoon tea with society friends. This was different. Wild, uncontrolled giggles mixed with deep belly laughs. The sound was coming from the formal dining room, the one they only used for important dinners. Marcus moved silently down the marble hallway, his Italian leather shoes making no sound. Years of negotiating billion-dollar deals had taught him the value of observation before action. He paused at the doorway, and what he saw made him freeze completely. The dining table that usually held fresh orchids in baccarat crystal vases was covered in flour. White powder dusted every surface like snow. At one end of the table, Emma stood on a chair, her school uniform destroyed with chocolate and butter stains. Her usually perfect braids had come undone, blonde hair wild around her face. She was laughing so hard tears streamed down her cheeks. But that wasn't what stopped Marcus cold. It was who was with her. James, the family's driver for the past 3 years, stood beside Emma wearing Victoria's pink apron with ruffles. The serious man who usually wore a black suit and rarely spoke was now covered head to toe in cake batter. He had chocolate frosting on his nose and flour in his dark hair. Maria, their 60-year-old housekeeper, was sitting on the floor. Marcus had never seen Maria sit anywhere except properly in a chair during her lunch break. She was holding her stomach, laughing until she couldn't breathe. Around them, the formal dining room looked like a bakery had exploded. There were mixing bowls everywhere. Broken eggshells littered the Persian rug that cost more than a car. And in the center of it all sat the most lopsided, ugly, wonderful chocolate cake Marcus had ever seen. "James, you put salt instead of sugar again." Emma shrieked with delight, pointing at the mixing bowl. "How do you mess that up 3 times?" James scratched his head, sending a cloud of flour into the air. "In my defense, Princess Emma, they look exactly the same. Perhaps we should label them?" Maria wheezed from the floor, trying to catch her breath between laughs. "Senor James, you are the worst baker in all of California. Maybe in all of America." She said it with such warmth that it sounded like the highest compliment. But Emma, mi amor, your decorating makes up for his terrible baking. Look at those flowers you made from frosting. Emma beamed with pride, her face glowing in a way Marcus hadn't seen in months. Maybe years. Maria taught me. She said her grandmother in Mexico taught her when she was my age. And James helped me write "Happy Birthday Daddy" on top, even though Daddy probably won't be home to see it. Marcus felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Today was his birthday. He had forgotten his own birthday. But his 8-year-old daughter hadn't. Neither had the driver who barely spoke. Or the housekeeper who worked 14-hour days keeping his perfect house perfect. They had remembered what he had forgotten. We should clean this up before Mrs. Sterling gets home, James said, suddenly looking worried. She said she had that charity board meeting until 6. Maria nodded, struggling to stand up from the floor. See. Mrs. Victoria would not understand. She does not like messes. Emma's face fell slightly. Mommy doesn't like fun anymore. She used to bake with me when I was little. Now she says it's what we pay people to do. The innocent words cut through the air like a knife. James and Maria exchanged a look that Marcus couldn't quite read. It was the look of people who knew things, who saw things, who understood things about his family that he didn't. Your mommy is very busy being important, Maria said gently, helping Emma down from the chair. Just like your daddy. Important people don't always have time for flower fights and ugly cakes. Emma nodded solemnly, suddenly looking much older than 8. That's okay. I have you and James. You're my real family anyway. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. James knelt down to Emma's level, his eyes kind behind his wire-rimmed glasses. How about we save your dad a piece? We can put it in the refrigerator with a note. Even if he comes home late, he'll know you remembered. Emma brightened slightly. Do you think he'll eat it? Even though it's ugly and might taste like salt? Maria laughed, pulling the little girl into a flower-covered hug. Mi amor, the most beautiful cakes are the ones made with love. And this cake has more love than any fancy bakery could ever make. Marcus stepped back from the doorway, his mind spinning. He pulled out his phone to check the time and saw 17 missed calls from his assistant. 8 text messages about the crisis at work. 3 emails marked urgent. On any other day, he would already be calling back, already solving problems, already being important. But standing in his perfect hallway, looking at the chaos in his perfect dining room, Marcus realized something. He had built an empire but lost his kingdom. He had gained the world but lost his family. His daughter thought the hired help were her real family. And the worst part? She was right. James and Maria had shown up for her in ways he never had. They knew her favorite color, her favorite songs, what made her laugh. He knew his company's quarterly projections for the next 5 years but couldn't remember the last time he had heard his daughter laugh like that. Marcus made a decision. He turned off his phone completely, something he hadn't done in 3 years. Then he loosened his $500 tie, removed his jacket, and rolled up his sleeves. He took a deep breath and stepped into the doorway. Room for one more in this flower fight? 3 faces turned to him in shock. Emma's eyes went wide. James immediately stood up straighter, the pink apron making him look ridiculous and wonderful at the same time. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Emma whispered, "Daddy. You're home. But it's only 3 o'clock." Marcus walked into the room, his expensive shoes crunching on eggshells. "I heard there was a birthday cake being made." "My birthday cake. I couldn't miss that, could I?" Emma's face transformed. Joy, pure and simple, lit up her features. "You remembered it's your birthday?" Marcus knelt down, not caring about his custom-tailored pants. "Actually, Princess, I forgot." "But you didn't. You and James and Maria, you remembered when I didn't even remember myself. Mr. Sterling, sir, James started, his face flushed with embarrassment. We apologize for the mess. We'll clean everything immediately. Marcus stood up and did something that shocked everyone, including himself. He picked up a handful of flour from the table and threw it at James. The white powder exploded against the pink apron. Did you just call my daughter princess? Marcus asked, fighting a smile. I call her that too. And Maria, did I hear something about your grandmother's frosting flowers? Maria nodded, still stunned. Yes, Mr. Sterling. She had a small bakery in Oaxaca. Very small, but everyone loved her cakes. Marcus picked up one of the lopsided frosting flowers from the cake. Could you teach me? I mean, I'm probably worse at baking than James here, but I'd like to learn. Emma grabbed his hand, jumping up and down. Really, Daddy? You want to bake with us? But Mommy says important people don't bake. Marcus looked down at his daughter, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in years. You know what, Emma? I've been important for a long time. Today, I just want to be Daddy. What followed was the messiest, loudest, most imperfect hour of Marcus Sterling's very perfect life. He learned that James, his quiet driver, had once dreamed of being a chef before life led him to driving cars for wealthy families. The man who barely spoke in 3 years of employment became animated when discussing the science of baking, why eggs needed to be room temperature, how butter should be creamed just right. He learned that Maria had raised 4 children of her own, all now grown with families of their own. She saw them once a month if she was lucky, because she worked 6 days a week keeping other people's houses clean. But she spoke of them with such pride, showing pictures on her phone of grandchildren Marcus had never known existed. And he learned about Emma. His own daughter was a mystery he finally began to solve. She hated tennis but was too scared to tell her mother. She loved writing stories about dragons and knights but hid them because Victoria said creative writing wasn't practical. She had won a poetry contest at school but hadn't told anyone because the ceremony was during business hours and she knew her parents wouldn't come. As they worked on decorating the disaster of a cake, Emma chattering non-stop about everything and nothing, Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. It was like ice cracking after a long winter. For 3 years, since the company went public, he had been frozen. Going through motions. Making money. Being successful. Being important. But not being alive. Not really. Mr. Sterling, Maria said quietly as they watched Emma and James attempt to make another frosting rose. Forgive me for speaking out of turn, but Emma, she is a special girl. Very special. She has a big heart. She notices things. She sees when James is sad about his mother being sick. She makes him cards. She sees when I miss my grandchildren. She draws me pictures. She has so much love to give. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. I know. I mean, I'm learning. I've missed so much, Maria. The older woman patted his flower-covered arm gently. It is never too late to start, Mr. Sterling. Never too late. At that moment, the front door opened. The sound of expensive heels clicked on marble, getting closer. Victoria's voice called out, sharp and irritated. Maria. Why is the chandelier not polished? I specifically asked for it to be done before the weekend. Everyone in the dining room froze. Emma's face went pale. James quickly tried to remove the pink apron. Maria began gathering mixing bowls frantically. But Marcus stood still, watching his wife's reaction as she appeared in the doorway. Victoria Sterling stood there in her white designer suit, her platinum hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the afternoon heat. Her eyes took in the destroyed dining room, the cake disaster, her husband covered in flour, and her daughter looking guilty and happy in equal measure. What is this? Her voice was ice. Marcus? What are you doing home? And what have you done to my dining room? Before Marcus could answer, Emma spoke up, her small voice brave but trembling. We made Daddy a birthday cake, Mommy. Because it's his birthday. Victoria's eyes narrowed. We have a pastry chef for that, Emma. This is inappropriate. Maria, you're fired. James, you too. This is completely unacceptable. The room went silent. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Maria's face crumpled. James stood frozen, his dreams of his sick mother's medical bills flashing across his face. And Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Anger. Real, protective, purposeful anger. No, he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. Excuse me. Marcus stepped forward, putting his hand on Emma's shoulder. I said no. You're not firing anyone. Maria and James were doing what we should have been doing. Being a family. Celebrating together. Making memories. Even if they're messy ones. Victoria laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Have you lost your mind? Look at this room. It's destroyed. What will people think if they saw this? Marcus looked at his wife, really looked at her. When had she become this person? When had they become these people? I don't care what people think, he said. I care that our daughter thinks the staff are her real family. I care that I forgot my own birthday but they didn't. I care that I've been so busy being successful that I forgot to be a father. A husband. A human being. Victoria's face flushed red. This is ridiculous. We have a reputation to maintain. Standards. We are not the kind of people who bake cakes and make messes. Marcus nodded slowly. You're right. We're not. But maybe we should be. He turned to Emma, whose tears were now flowing freely. Princess, why don't you show Mommy the frosting flowers you made? They're beautiful. Emma shook her head, stepping closer to Maria. Mommy doesn't like my flowers. She doesn't like anything I make. It's okay, Daddy. I understand. The words hung in the air like a confession. Victoria's face changed, just for a moment. Something flickered across her features. Regret? Recognition? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. This is insane, she said. Marcus, you have 17 missed calls. The Tokyo deal is falling apart. And you're here playing with flour? Marcus pulled out his phone and, without looking at it, dropped it in the bowl of cake batter. Everyone gasped. The phone made a small splash and disappeared into the chocolate mixture. The Tokyo deal can wait, he said. My daughter can't. Her childhood is happening right now. And I've already missed 8 years of it. Victoria stared at him like he was a stranger. Who are you? This isn't the man I married. The man I married understood priorities. Understood success. Marcus met her gaze steadily. The man you married got lost somewhere between the 3rd merger and the 7th acquisition. But maybe, just maybe, I can find him again. Starting today. Starting with this ugly, beautiful birthday cake my daughter made because she loves me more than I deserve. Victoria shook her head, backing away from the doorway. When you come to your senses, call me. I'll be at the club. She turned on her designer heels and left, the sound of her footsteps fading until the front door slammed shut. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Emma asked in a small voice, Is Mommy coming back? Marcus knelt down and pulled his daughter into a hug, not caring about the flour and frosting transferring to his expensive shirt. I don't know, Princess. But I promise you this. I'm not going anywhere. Not anymore. Maria and James stood awkwardly, unsure what to do. Marcus looked up at them. I meant what I said. You're not fired. In fact, James, I want to hear more about your dream of being a chef. And Maria, I want to know about your grandchildren. But first, we have a birthday cake to finish. And then eat. Even if it does taste like salt. James cracked a small smile. Actually, Mr. Sterling, I think we got it right this time. Fourth time's the charm. Emma giggled through her tears. Daddy, you have chocolate in your hair. Marcus laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. Then I match the cake, don't I? As the four of them stood there in the destroyed dining room, covered in flour and frosting, Marcus realized something profound. This was what he had been missing. Not board meetings or hotel acquisitions or society galas. This. Connection. Laughter. Imperfection. Love. Real love, not the performed kind for charity photographs and business dinners. The cake, when they finally sat down to eat it, was indeed terrible. Too salty, too sweet, somehow burnt on the outside and raw in the middle. The frosting flowers looked more like abstract art than roses. But as Marcus sat there, eating every bite of his piece while Emma told him about her secret stories and Maria shared tales of her grandmother's bakery and James explained the chemistry of proper baking, he thought it was the most perfect birthday he had ever had. Because for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Marcus Sterling wasn't trying to be important. He was just trying to be present. And that, he realized, was the most important thing of all. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, painting the messy dining room in shades of gold and orange, Marcus made a decision. Tomorrow, he would start changing things. He would restructure his schedule. He would delegate more. He would learn to bake properly with James. He would read Emma's stories. He would help Maria video call her grandchildren during lunch breaks. He would stop being a millionaire who came home to a house and start being a father who came home to a family. But tonight, covered in flour with his phone drowning in cake batter, Marcus Sterling was exactly where he needed to be. Home. Really, truly home. And he couldn't believe what he had been missing all along. The title of his life story could have been Millionaire Comes Home Early. And can't believe what he sees. But now he wanted to write a new chapter. One where coming home wasn't the exception but the rule. One where birthday cakes were always ugly and perfect. One where family meant more than blood or marriage certificates. It meant showing up, making messes, and choosing love over importance every single time. The weeks that followed the birthday cake disaster, as Emma had started calling it with giggles, brought changes no one could have predicted. Marcus kept his promise. He restructured everything. The Tokyo deal that had seemed so urgent resolved itself without his constant interference. His executives, finally given real authority, rose to the occasion. His company ran better with him working 40 hours a week instead of 80. Who would have thought that burned-out employees performed worse than rested ones? Or that a CEO who knew his daughter's favorite book series was more creative in board meetings than one who slept in his office? Victoria had returned the next day, but something fundamental had shifted. She moved through the house like a ghost, present but not really there. She attended her charity events. She maintained her schedule. But she watched with bewilderment as her husband taught their daughter to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, getting batter on the ceiling. She observed in silence as James gave cooking lessons in the kitchen he had only driven to before. She said nothing when Maria's grandchildren visited one Sunday, filling the usually quiet mansion with the chaos of 5 kids under 10. The perfect house became perfectly imperfect, and Victoria couldn't understand why everyone seemed happier. 3 months after the birthday cake, Marcus found Emma in the garden with James. They were planting tomatoes, of all things. The designer landscape of imported Japanese maples and rare orchids now included a vegetable patch. "Daddy!" Emma called out, her hands covered in soil. "James says if we grow our own tomatoes, our pasta sauce will taste better than any restaurant." Marcus joined them, kneeling in the dirt in his work clothes. He had donated most of his expensive suits to charity, keeping only a few for necessary occasions. "Is that so, Chef James?" James smiled, an expression that had become common on his previously serious face. "My mother always said food tastes better when you grow it yourself. She had a small garden in Tennessee before she got sick." Marcus had learned about James's mother's battle with cancer, about the medical bills that crushed dreams, about sacrifice and quiet dignity. He had quietly arranged for her to be transferred to the best oncologist in California, all expenses covered. James had cried that day, the first time in 20 years, he told Marcus later. Maria appeared with lemonade, her own recipe from Oaxaca. "Mr. Marcus, telephone for you." "It's the office." Marcus didn't move from his spot in the dirt. "Take a message, Maria. I'm growing tomatoes with my daughter." Maria smiled, her eyes crinkling. "See, I tell them you are doing something more important." And it was more important. Every muddy handprint, every failed recipe, every bedtime story was more important than another $1 million he didn't need. One evening, as autumn painted the ocean in shades of copper and gold, Marcus found Victoria in the formal living room they never used. She was looking at their wedding photo, the one where they both looked so young, so certain, so in love with the future they were building. "We're different people then," she said without turning around. Marcus sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "We were. But people can change, Victoria." "I did. You could too." She shook her head slowly. "I don't know how. I've been perfect for so long, I don't remember how to be real. I see you all, covered in flour or dirt or paint, laughing at nothing, and I feel like I'm watching through glass. I can see it, but I can't touch it. I don't know how to touch it anymore." For the first time in months, Marcus saw his wife clearly. Not the cold society woman she had become, but the frightened girl underneath who thought love meant being flawless. "Do you remember," he said softly, "when we lived in that tiny apartment in Chicago? You made spaghetti every Tuesday because it was all we could afford. You sang in the shower. You danced in the kitchen. What happened to that girl?" Victoria's perfectly composed face cracked slightly. "She wasn't good enough. Your mother said so at our engagement party. Said you needed a wife who could match your ambition. So I became her. I became perfect. And somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be anything else." The revelation hit Marcus like cold water. His mother, with her impossible standards and constant criticism, had shaped more than just his drive for success. She had shaped his wife's transformation from the warm, laughing girl he fell in love with to this polished stranger. "My mother was wrong," he said firmly. "About everything. Success isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about showing up messy and real and vulnerable. Emma needs a mother, not a perfect hostess. And maybe, if you're willing, we could try to find that girl who sang in the shower. Together." Victoria turned to him, and for the first time in years, he saw tears in her eyes. Real tears, not the practiced ones for sad charity stories. "I don't know if I can. I've been this way so long. And Emma, she's afraid of me. My own daughter is afraid of me." Marcus reached out slowly, taking her manicured hand in his dirt-stained one. "Then start small. Tomorrow is Saturday. Come make pancakes with us. You'll get batter in your hair. Emma will laugh. It will be messy and imperfect and real. Just try." Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of day that made the ocean look like hammered silver. Marcus was in the kitchen with Emma, preparing their weekly pancake tradition, when Victoria appeared in the doorway. She wore jeans, actual jeans, and one of Marcus's old college t-shirts. Emma dropped her whisk, batter splattering across the floor. "Mommy?" Victoria took a shaky breath. "I thought maybe I could help. If that's okay. I might not be very good at it anymore." Emma looked at Marcus, uncertain. He nodded encouragingly. Slowly, like approaching a wild animal, Emma picked up an extra apron, one of Maria's with flowers and ruffles. You can stir the batter, Mommy. But James says you have to sing while you stir or the pancakes will be flat. Victoria's laugh was rusty, amused. James says that? James himself appeared, drawn by the voices. He saw Victoria and started to retreat, but she called out, James, I owe you an apology. Several, actually. You've been more of a parent to Emma than I have. Thank you for that. And I'm sorry for that. James stood frozen, clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Sterling, you don't need to, but Victoria interrupted. Yes, I do. And it's Victoria. Just Victoria. Now, what's this about singing to the batter? What followed was the most awkward, beautiful morning the Sterling house had seen. Victoria's first pancake stuck to the ceiling when she flipped it too enthusiastically. Emma laughed so hard she got hiccups. Marcus caught it on video, Victoria's shocked face covered in batter drops. Maria arrived and nearly fainted seeing Victoria in jeans, then recovered enough to teach her the proper wrist motion for flipping. James shared his secret ingredient, a touch of vanilla and lemon zest. By noon, the kitchen was destroyed, and Victoria was unrecognizable. Hair wild, shirt stained, flower handprint on her cheek where Emma had touched her while saying, You're doing great, Mommy. They ate burnt pancakes and perfect ones, sitting together at the kitchen island instead of the formal dining room. Victoria told a story about her own childhood, about making mud pies with her sister before her parents divorced and everything had to be perfect to keep peace. It wasn't a miracle. There were still hard days. Days when Victoria retreated into old patterns. Days when Marcus got pulled into work drama. Days when Emma didn't trust that this new family was permanent. But slowly, meal by meal, mistake by mistake, they built something new. Not perfect, but theirs. The mansion that had been a museum became a home. Neighbors started noticing the changes. The Sterling estate, once known for its pristine silence, now regularly erupted with laughter. Children's voices in the garden. Music from the kitchen. The security guards reported that Mr. Sterling came home every day at 5:30. Mrs. Sterling was seen at the grocery store, of all places, comparing tomato prices with Maria. Emma Sterling, the quiet girl who never smiled in public, won her school talent show with a story about a magical chef who could make happiness soup. One evening, 6 months after the birthday cake disaster, Marcus came home to find his dining room transformed again. But this time, intentionally. A banner hung across the room, Happy Birthday Daddy, Take 2. The table was set with mismatched plates Emma had painted herself. James stood proudly beside a cake that, while not professional, was clearly made with skill and love. Maria had taught Victoria to make paper flowers, and they decorated every surface. Emma wore a chef's hat she had made from newspaper. And Victoria, his perfect wife, had flour in her hair and chocolate on her nose and was laughing, really laughing, as she tried to light trick candles that kept relighting. Surprise, they all shouted when they saw him. We thought you deserved a proper birthday, Victoria said, suddenly shy. One where you're not ambushed by a mess but invited into one. Marcus looked around the room at his family. His real family. Not just the one bound by blood or law, but by choice and love and shared disasters. James and Maria had become more than employees. They were the aunt and uncle Emma had never had. Victoria had become more than a wife going through motions. She was learning to be a mother, a partner, a person again. And Emma, his precious daughter, no longer looked older than her years. She was just a little girl who knew she was loved, wildly and imperfectly and completely. This is perfect, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma corrected him with a grin. No, Daddy. It's not perfect. That's what makes it perfect. As they gathered around the table, Marcus thought about the title of this chapter of his life, Millionaire Comes Home Early. And can't believe what he sees. He had come home early that day expecting nothing and found everything. He had discovered that his real wealth wasn't in his bank accounts or his properties. It was in these people, these moments, these beautiful disasters that made life worth living. The businessman in him wanted to calculate the value of what he had gained versus what he had risked. But the father, the husband, the human being he had become knew that some things couldn't be measured in numbers. They could only be measured in laughter, in flower fights, in burnt pancakes, in the way his daughter now ran to greet him every evening, in the way Victoria sang in the shower again, in the way James and Maria had become family. The cake, when they finally cut it, was delicious. Moist, rich, with frosting flowers that actually looked like flowers. "We practiced," Emma announced proudly. "A lot. Maria's kitchen looks like a cake bomb went off." Maria laughed. "See, but is worth it for family." Family. The word hung in the air like a blessing. Marcus raised his glass of Emma's homemade lemonade. "To family. The one we choose, the one we build, and the one we almost lost but found again." They clinked glasses, even Emma with her sippy cup that she insisted she was too old for but still secretly loved. Outside, the Pacific Ocean continued its eternal dance. Inside, the Sterling mansion was no longer a showcase of success. It was a home. Messy, loud, imperfect, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. As the evening wound down and Emma fell asleep on the couch between her parents, chocolate cake still on her face, Marcus whispered to Victoria, "Thank you for trying. For coming back to us." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, something she hadn't done in years. "Thank you for showing me the way. For choosing us over everything else." In the kitchen, James and Maria cleaned dishes together, singing an old song in Spanish that Maria was teaching him. They had become friends, these two unlikely people brought together by their love for a little girl who needed them. Marcus looked around his home and realized that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments. If he hadn't come home early that day, if he hadn't seen what he was missing, if he hadn't chosen different, they would all still be living parallel lives in the same house. Now they were living one life, together, beautifully chaotic and wonderfully real. The millionaire had come home early and couldn't believe what he saw. But now, Marcus Sterling came home early every day, and he believed in what he saw with his whole heart. A family not perfect in its presentation but perfect in its love. A home not pristine in its appearance but pristine in its joy. A life not measured in dollars but in the moments that no money could ever buy. And every night, as he tucked Emma into bed, she would whisper the same thing, "Best day ever, Daddy." And Marcus would whisper back, "Just wait until tomorrow, Princess. It gets better every day." The story of the Sterling family continued, day by messy day, mistake by beautiful mistake. There were setbacks. Victoria sometimes struggled with letting go of control. Marcus occasionally got pulled into old patterns of overwork. Emma had to learn to trust that this new life was permanent. James battled with accepting that he was family, not just an employee. Maria had to be convinced to bring her grandchildren over more often. But together, they faced each challenge. Together, they chose love over perfection, presence over prosperity, and family over everything else. And in the end, that choice made Marcus Sterling the richest man in the world. Not in money, though he had plenty of that. But in the currency that really mattered, love, laughter, and the beautiful disaster of a real family. The millionaire had come home early that fateful day and couldn't believe what he saw. Now, he couldn't believe he had ever lived any other way.